Okay, so hi everybody, I'm Jennifer, and today we are doing our July artist talk for Tethered, which is Miriam North Amora, Anita. Oh, I'm blanking on Anita's name and she's not here. I'm just blanking on her last name. What? Help me out, somebody. I just blank. I always do this.
Ronderos.
Gonzalez Ronderos. Thank you. Um, and Elaine Farley Kennard. And so Elaine is going to go first. We are going to, open it up for questions if anybody's got any afterwards. And but feel free to pop things in the chat, and I'll kind of try to keep an eye on that. And but Elaine, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll start from there.
Hi, I am Elaine Farley Kennard, and this is my piece, Trip the Light. And so I have a lot I want to say, so I will go ahead and start. Okay. There's a lot I want to unpack about my piece, which is called Trip the Light. First thing is that I grow my own cotton in my backyard and pick, gin, and spin it. This cotton has been stained with turmeric and is twisted into a 4-ply rope twist. There is some variation in color due to different concentrations of turmeric versus amounts of cotton soaking up the spice. Some of it is a bit brown from where I experimented with green tea. It is installed in this wedge shape, which mimics systemic light, starting towards the window right here, to give it an obvious point of origin. It spills a couple feet onto the adjacent wall to create optimal shadows, to add contrast to the light. Chiaroscuro is what it's called in painting when you have an extreme light source. The shiny silver hardware emphasizes the softness of the cotton yarn. The cotton lacks the artificial sheen of synthetic yarn made from oil. Its lines created by the yarn remind me of empty music paper. I took 12 years of violin lessons, and though I don't play as well as I'd like, my hearing impediment makes things complicated, I read music very well. As for the name, Trip the Light, this too has a musical origin. One of my mom's favorite songs is Whiter Shade of Pale, and the first line of this song is Trip the Light Fandango. With my hearing impediment, I always assumed that I was mishearing that line, but when I found out I was correct, I became very interested. It's such a weird turn of phrase. I knew it must reference something real, but I couldn't find out what. It bothered me for years, until a couple months ago when I was watching Lucifer. It was a flashback episode to the 1920s, where he casually said, "Trip the light, fantastic." And I was so excited. I knew that must be the origin of the line. So I looked it up, and sure enough, it's an old way of saying dance, trip the light, fantastic. And it was very common at the turn of the 20th century. It originates from a poem written in 1645 that says, "Come and trip it as you go, oh, the light fantastic toe." So my piece makes me think of music and dancing and sunlight, all of which help keep me tethered.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Elaine. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then Miriam is going to start. Let me pull up your work, Miriam.
Hi, I'm Miriam. So this is my work. So I want to talk a little bit about the show title. The show title is Tethered, which if you look up the word tethered, it's tied to, restrained, or limited, or confined. And I think in the past year, a lot of people have felt that. But also I like the tethered for our group, for Anita, for Elaine, and myself. We're all working with threads in some way. And so that kind of seemed to be a good title for us, I think. Elaine can chime in on that as well if she wants to, but that was kind of part of where the show title comes from. So I have my work is there's kind of two parts to my work. There's the woven and then there's the Polaroid transfers. And it was brought up to me, I was thinking of these as very different, but there is a relationship between them in that they're dealing with layers. I work with distortion, taking an image and distorting it in my weavings. And then with the Polaroid transfer, there's a distortion that happens from the original Polaroid photo. So I just want to talk a bit about the two pieces on the end. There's the one in the red and the one that's kind of in the beige color. So this one is called A Jane Doe, and that references a Jane Doe that was found in Hawaii. And it's the same image, same person as shown in the last one, which is called Pansy Jane Doe. And she was found in a park, just living in a park. So oftentimes when we think of Jane Doe or John Doe, we think of deceased, but they can also refer to unidentified people that are living or people that don't want to be identified. So I've started looking at identity through Jane and John Doe's and what that means. But this woman was never identified as to who she was for the rest of her life. So she ended up in a state hospital and assisted living until her death. But for about 9 years, she was just known as or Pansy. And they were never able to find out who she was. And they suspected she may have schizophrenia, some other mental issues connected to delusional states of mind. But so these pieces and some other pieces that I'm not showing kind of are in, for me, exploring identity on many different levels and just trying to understand what we put into a name and what we put into identity. Just the idea that your name and your identity change and impact the way you interact with the world and the way the world interacts with you. And it's also the idea that you, in some ways, you create your own story, but in other ways, people create a story about you, which for me then kind of starts to come back to the use of textiles and thread, which a yarn, people say, I'm telling a yarn, or are you telling a story? So you can tell your own story or someone else can tell your story. And there's different amounts of control to that. So again, in my weaving, I layer images, and this, you can't see it in the red one as much, but there is the image of the beigey brown one is behind that, and behind this one is the red image. And if you look at it, you can see that second face. It's kind of lower down within the picture. And then I overlay with layers inlay process to kind of obscure the face even further. You only get a partial view or partial understanding of who the person is. So it's also, I think it's also for me, all these pieces, the photography and the weaving are all about record keeping and layers, and record keeping not as necessarily being fact or truth, but being defined in other ways. But so the Polaroids have become part of a journal to me, or journal system, identifying just times and days as a marker of this year. So I started them in January, and I kind of do a few whenever the mood hits me. Normally I've been carrying a Polaroid camera around from place to place and just take shots of things that just strike me. So it's similar to just a journal entry that could be written, or sketchbook drawing or something like that. I'm trying to see what else. I have all these notes and I'm jumping around. I'm going to talk about that central one with all the text on it. So this one also it relates to the John and Jane Doe images that I'm working on, but it also, I think it relates to a lot of things that people have felt in the last few years, ideas of loss, loss as being something that's taken or something that's unknown or is missing, and in relation to people, what that means to everyone. So that I think is going to be a very different response to what it means for people to be lost or lost people, whether that's through death or not being able to be in close proximity to people, or other things. That's kind of where this piece comes from and where it connects to the other pieces. So I think those. Okay, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. The idea of the Jane Doe and John Doe series kind of came to me out of thinking about, I often worked from family portraits and trying to understand these people that I didn't know that are part of my past. And one of my great-grandmothers, I don't know her name. I only know where she died. I don't know when she was born or how old she was or anything about her. And when I met family from that side of the family, there's language barrier, but through translation, I was told her name was Jane. And that's definitely not her name. She was Sri Lankan, and that's a name probably colonially given to her, maybe, but that's definitely not probably her name. And then the idea of Jane Doe and John Doe and the strange, through this translation of language, being told that was what her name was, kind of fed into this. So that's kind of where this came from for me. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing right now.
I'm going to pull up some of Anita's work and just go through it real quick. And if any of you guys want to jump in, Anita's paper.
No. Oh, I was going to say that Anita, I believe she and Jennifer and Elaine jump in, tell me if I'm wrong on some of this, but some of this paper is paper she handmade and some of it's paper she marbled. And then what she's done with it is she's gone in and done some beautiful stitch work to accentuate what the marbling did. So there's this just kind of response and reaction and sensitivity to these pieces that I think is just really beautiful and delicate. And I wish Anita could tell us more about them, but they're very delicate pieces.
I think it was kind of a response to the group too, and you guys being so thread-based and materialistic in your approach. Anita works in a kind of a variety of genres. The last works that she showed were watercolors of her home landscape in Colombia that she did from memory. But she has used stitching on paperworks before too. So it's not a complete unusual jump for her. This is kind of part. And this, I wish I had individuals of these two. And I'll just kind of bring up Elaine's piece too, so we can kind of get some details of it. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to shoot at the group before we conclude? Any comments or anything like that?
Miriam, did you talk about sort of more of the process with the layering that you've done on the John Doe and both of those?
So I can't quite hear you.
I'm here. I was asking, did you talk a little bit about the process of how the John Doe or your grandmother, Jane Doe, were done?
No, so I no, I didn't. So my process of weaving is I weave a fabric and I dye paint an image onto the fabric. I pretty much always work from photographic images, and then I unweave the fabric and then reweave it. And then I also have an inlay technique called the Theo Mormon inlay technique, which is developed by a woman named Theo Mormon. So that's where the overlay of the like curve marks on the two Jane Doe pieces come from, and then some of the word lost on the one with all the text, that's the inlay, and then the people in that one is dye painted. And you can see in the reweaving, it creates a shadow and shifts the image a little bit.
It also is on top so much, which is interesting.
Yes, yeah.
It puts everything back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, is it done last?
It's done while I'm weaving.
Okay.
The inlay is done while I weave the image.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used multiple colors of thread so that it's I kind of have a little bit of variation in the color change.
Really wonderful.
Thank you.
That was kind of my question, is like, what is the effect that's generated with your unweaving it? Is it does it create this pixelization?
Yeah, it creates a pixelization and a distortion that in some way forms a grid, but then when I wrap them over the canvas, there's a little more distortion that occurs. Is similar to the Polaroid transfers. The Polaroid film itself is encapsulated in that like nice structure of the Polaroid, but then when you take that apart, then the emulsion in the film starts to allow for distortion, and also it comes apart. That pieces fall off, and it overlaps and kind of folds and layers with itself.
Yeah, you really emphasize the materiality of your work, I think, by messing with it and creating chaos within it. So I think that's where there's like these similarities.
Yeah, there's a controlled chaos or something to that effect. I don't know.
Elaine, talk about how long you've been growing your own cotton and where that idea came from and how you feel about it too now as you've been doing it for a while.
Well, I have been growing, I think this is my 5th year of growing cotton. And I mean, I come, like most of my ancestors, definitely on my mother's side, were all farmers. But, I grew up in the city, we just have a backyard. But, my mom always loved to do gardening and lots of vegetables. So, it was nothing new to do any gardening. But really, I got my hands on some seeds, and I thought the seeds were great, and I wanted to do something with seeds. So, of course, I needed more. And so I started growing my own cotton. I have buckets and buckets of seeds, and I just don't know what to do with it now that I have to do something with it. But, since my master's is in fiber, I do have an obsession with that tactile. And I've always been sort of obsessive and meticulous, process oriented in the work that I create. So once I got my hands on the cotton and started spinning it, I realized how much I loved it. And actually, I just bought an electric spinning wheel that arrived 2 days ago. So I've just been like sitting in front of that for a few days, working with some cotton that I still hadn't spun from last year. And I don't grow that many plants. I have like less than 20, but it creates a ton of cotton. I mean, like a lot more than I, as one person, can come up with things to do with. So this whole piece, even though it used a lot of cotton, I mean, maybe 25 or 30% of what I grew last summer is this piece. And of course, I've been using natural things to dye cotton, but cotton fiber-based materials don't hold dye as well as protein-based fibers like silk and wool. So it doesn't actually hold dye very easily. And turmeric was the most successful thing that I found for the cotton for holding it as far as a non-chemical dye goes. I'm growing some indigo and I've got chemicals to do that process. And that's what I'm going to do this year is I'm going to do some real chemistry and dye some cotton properly.
Did you grow the turmeric too?
Not the turmeric, no, just the indigo.
You should grow the turmeric too.
I don't think I can. I think
No, you can grow there.
I'd have to like grow a root and then like dry a root and then grind it. That's a lot. I have lots of root vegetables. In the South, we only have about this much topsoil, and then the rest is clay, which is great for cotton. Like cotton loves a shallow topsoil with that clay that just like holds water and like makes trees fall down. But yeah, it's not great for root vegetables.
Yeah, you'd need boxes for the turmeric. Yeah.
Elaine,
I am growing the indigo in a really deep, one of those sawed off wine barrels, and it's growing way better than last year, having more, like a foot of just like dirt. It's way taller. So,
Elaine, there's a few questions in the chat for you, and they're from Ethan Cole. They are, does growing cotton take very long? And then also the other one is, I know that turmeric creates a light sensitive dye. Does that aspect come into your work at all? Is that a complicating factor?
I mean, cotton is an annual. So you plant it in the spring, in a few months, it's flowering. And, by winter, it's going to be dead. So as far as how long it takes to grow, it's like any summer vegetable that you would grow. As far as the turmeric being light sensitive, I mean, all fabrics are light sensitive. Like all fabric fades in sunlight. UV light is very damaging for everything. So with this fade, yes. But it would take a few years. As far as turmeric goes, it's known for being heat sensitive. Like when I pulled these out of the boiling water, it was more of an orange, kind of a red orange. And if I were to put it like under a heat lamp, it might sort of get a red orange spot where the heat was, but it's temporary. As soon as it cools down, it goes back yellow.
Well, anyone else?
One last question with Elaine. Is the new electric spinner going to be? I love the way it's all out of order. So is that because it's hand done?
It is, and the electric spinner, it's not a big one. I got a little tiny $100 one. And so far, my consistency has been about equal to what I get hand spinning. It's just a lot faster. So I think it's still going to have that sort of hand done feel. Or maybe after I use it for a few years, I'll get really good and it'll look commercial. I don't know. But so far, it has about the same consistency as what I have to do.
Good.
Okay, well, I think we could conclude if there's nothing else. You guys did a really great job with the show and with the talk today. so wonderful to see your guys' work together. You know, there's such a great dialogue between you two. Okay, well, we can say farewell. Thanks so much to everybody for coming. We had a really nice turnout today. It was really nice to see everybody. So we'll see you guys later.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.